Okay, the recording has started. So, just who's going to be talking to you today? Just three of us, really just two of us. My name is Michael Walker. I'm with Texas A&M Transportation Institute, or TTI. I help oversee TTI's support for TxDOT, as well as other research projects that TTI leads in the public transit world. I'm joined today by my colleague Christina. Christina, would you like to say hello?
Well, good morning, everybody. For those of you who haven't met me already, my name is Christina Bune, and I work for TTI. I've been here for about 2 years. I report directly to Michael, and PTN 128 is kind of one of my favorite areas. So all things PTN 128. I'm really excited about it.
That's right. Christina is our PTN 128 program manager, so she oversees the entire PTN 128 reporting program on behalf of TxDOT. And we're also joined today by Kelly, who will mainly be helping us out through the chats and other technical assistance. Kelly, if you're on, are you able to say hello?
Yes. Hello.
All
Good
right.
morning.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate it. So because we have so many people in the room, we can't really go into have everybody introduce themselves. So I want to welcome you. We'd appreciate if you'd put a quick note in the chat. You can share your name, agency, organization, and position or role in the chat so we know who's here. And very thankful that you're here. While you're doing that, I'm going to walk you through the learning objectives for today's workshop. There are several, and we have 3 hours to get through all of this material, so we will be moving pretty quickly. That doesn't mean we don't want you to ask questions, okay? But by the end of this workshop, you should be able to understand and be able to describe the requirements for reporting transit data, both in the state of Texas and federally. You should be able to know and describe the uses of data that are in PTN 128. You should understand how data in PTN 28 have to be separated by mode. You have to report purchase transportation or a different type of service, and also report data by urban versus rural geographies. You should understand and be able to describe how to report your operating data, like hours, miles, and passenger trips, your fleet data and mechanical failures, your financial data, including expenses and revenues. You should be able to understand the features in PTN 128 and how to navigate PTN 128, understand the quarterly data checks and annual review process, and you get a little sneak peek of the new Texas Transit Tracker, or T3 is what it's called, the system. This Texas Transit Tracker is the new and improved PTN 128 system, okay? And at the very end of today's webinar, we'll go through that and give you some details about when to expect that to roll out. PTN 128 has many resources for you to try to help with the reporting process. We know things can be complicated. We have a PTN 128 reporting manual just recently revised and posted on the PTN 128 landing page. It was revised in July 2026. That'll cover FY26 reporting, or fiscal year 2026 reporting. There are also training videos, recordings of these things like these webinars. There's a tool on the PTN 128 website that helps with allocating expenses and revenues to different modes. That's all downloadable there. And there are often copies of the PowerPoint slides, including today's PowerPoint slides, will be posted to the PTN 128 website as well, probably by the end of the day. We have a jammed-packed agenda for today. And so you see on the far right-hand column how many minutes we're planning to spend on each session. It's 180 minutes. That's not that many minutes, right? Just 3 hours. We have 2 breaks. Each are targeting at the top of the hour, so a break at 10 and a break at 11. We'll cover modules 1 through 4, which will get us from an overview of reporting requirements all the way through to reporting unlinked passenger trips between 9 and 10. We'll take a break at 10 for 5 minutes. Then we'll cover fleet and mechanical failures and everybody's favorite topic, financial data, module 6 and 7. We'll cover expenses and revenues. That'll take the 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock hour. And then starting at 11 or 11:05, we'll then walk through the revenue allocation and expense allocation with module 8. We'll then talk about just using the PTN 128 system with module 9, and then close things up with module 10. And look at that, I found a typo. Module 11, the Texas Transit Track. No, I didn't. Sorry. Module 10 and 11 are the quarterly check reports and the annual review process. Module 12 is the Texas Transit Tracker. And then we have a quick wrap up. We do have an evaluation survey at the end of the workshop. So we'd really appreciate if that you stay through to that last 5 minutes so you can fill out that evaluation survey, because we do share that data back to PTN. And we also use that data to help improve these workshops. So that is our introduction. Does anybody have any questions about what to expect today before we get into our first module? Okay. Hearing none, and yeah, that's okay. I saw some people unmuting, and they're like probably gonna say, "No, I don't." That's great. You're welcome to do that. I know that's hard with a 3-hour webinar, right, Armando? Yeah, I saw that. I saw that on mute.
Yeah, my apologies.
No, it's good. It's good. So feel free to chime in again at any time, and try to be here as best you can. I know it's very tempting to be checking emails and doing other things. All right, so we're going to get into Module 1. This is an overview of reporting requirements. So during this module, we'll cover what is PTN 128, particularly for those that are new. We're going to get into who has to report, why, what has to be reported, and how to report it in the level of detail. So for those of you that are newer to the PTN 128 reporting requirements and things, PTN 128 is the acronym, word abbreviation that we use to describe a web-based system for collecting transit data across the state of Texas that helps the state of Texas to meet both state and federal requirements. PTN 128 system is hosted and managed by TTI on behalf of TxDOT. So who needs to put their data in PTN 128? Well, that is a great question, and really it comes down to two specific criteria. If you're in the state of Texas, that's criteria number one, and you operate public transportation, and you receive state or federal funding to operate public transportation, your agency, your entity needs to be reporting their data into PTN 128. Those are the two basic requirements. So bottom line is pretty much anybody at any transit agency in Texas needs to report their data. And this covers a wide range of entities from metropolitan systems like DART, Houston Metro, et cetera, all the way through rural districts, urban districts, agencies that receive federal funds directly from FTA but don't receive anything from TxDOT, or agencies that receive federal funds from FTA through some other recipient, like as a pass-through arrangement or a split letter. If you're in an urbanized area, right, and you're receiving FTA funds, that means that you meet the criteria for reporting to PTN 128. Also, Section 53 specialized agencies. We don't spend a lot of time on those in this training because this training is mainly focused on public transportation providers that are mainly your 5307 urban and 5311 rural providers in the state. Why, you might say? Well, as every good thing, it starts with the law, right? So we have federal law to comply with. Texas Transportation Code 456 basically says any public transportation provider in Texas receiving state or federal funds needs to report monthly data to TxDOT. And that data is, of course, complying with the law and is also used to report the Texas Transit Statistics Report. The PTN 128 reporting also helps TxDOT to meet the compliance requirements it has under federal law, right? So because TxDOT is 5311 subrecipients in particular, TxDOT has to submit their data to the National Transit Database. And so to comply with federal law, this data needs to be collected in PTN 128. And so besides the law, it's also the money, right? That's the other main reason to do anything. And the data that's put into PTN 128 feeds into funding formula apportionments, both from FTA and the funding that's allocated by TxDOT. And last but not least, the data in PTN 128 is used for other things like needs assessment, performance measurement, and other kinds of trend analysis. You might ask, well, if I already report to the National Transit Database. If you've heard of NTD or the National Transit Database, you might already be reporting your data there if you're an urban reporter receiving 5307 funds. And that database is a critical part of collecting transit data across the U.S., and it's for FTA in particular. And the one challenge that we have is that there's a different requirement for NTD reporting versus PTN 128 reporting. One is that TxDOT has to complete the Section 5311 NTD reports. So those agencies that are just subrecipients of TxDOT, TxDOT's the one that submits that data. So there has to be a way that TxDOT gets it. PTN 128 is that way. Secondly, there's some differences between PTN 128 and NTD, even though the data definitions are pretty similar and what needs to be reported is pretty similar. PTN 128 uses the state fiscal year, right? That's what's set up in PTN 128. PTN 128 requires monthly data. That's to comply with the state administrative code, which actually says collect monthly data, right? So the data has to be monthly from public transportation providers. That's PTN 128 meets that requirement, NTD does not. And there are some differences between the two systems in terms of costs and revenue reporting, which I know can be annoying for agencies that have to report to both. But that's one of the reasons that we have a whole separate system just to collect data for the state. And again, it does come down to this question of funding. This diagram shows you how the transit data that is reported in that you have some of you report directly to NTD, some of you report to PTN 128, some of you do both. That NTD data is used to calculate federal apportionments and ultimately lead to funding distributions. The PTN 128 data is used to perform the state allocation, the funds that are allocated by TxDOT, like state rural, state small urban, and state large urban money. And so it's really critical that the data in the systems, both NTD and PTN 128, are as accurate as possible because they determine how much funding agencies get through formula programs. So what has to be reported in these systems? One key thing that's important to remember is that the system should contain public transportation data only. This should only contain hours, miles, costs, revenues, etc., related to public transportation. Public transportation is a specific kind of service. It has to be shared ride, and it has to be for passengers, and it cannot be it excludes several different kinds of service. PTN 128 should not include any data from providing services provided by aircraft, ambulances, etc., should not include charter bus service, should not include school bus service if you're doing dedicated school bus service. This theme will come up multiple times. Data from your agency for these kinds of services, if you are doing them, should not be in PTN 128. If your agency provides any other transportation services that are not public transportation, PTN 128 should only include the public transportation data. If your agency does any other non-transportation services, maybe you have a financial assistance program for seniors or a senior housing or something else, right? The costs and revenues, miles and hours spent on those non-public transportation programs or non-transportation programs should not be visible in PTN 128. So if you're looking at just the public transportation data that your agency has, PTN 128 data falls into these three main categories. What we call operating data, which is your services supplied and services operated. The services that were consumed, this is ridership, how many people boarded the vehicles. Your financial data, expenses and revenues, and your fleet data, including vehicle counts and mechanical failures. If you have these things, you will have a complete PTN 128 report. As long as you can take these data elements and disaggregate them according to the requirements of PTN 128, including we have to have data by mode. We'll get into what travel modes are in the next module. The data has to be submitted by month. Remember, I mentioned that that's required in the Texas Administrative Code. And data has to be separated between urban and rural service, which we'll talk about in the next module. And also specialized transportation providers might need they file a whole different report. Any questions on this so far? No? All right.
Michael, hey, I do, sorry.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
Okay, can you back up a slide to where you were talking about public transportation only? Okay. So when you were listening, I get school bus, I get charter, I get all that. So if I've got a contract with a senior center or something like that to do service, but I do it in my regular service hours, that does not count as public.
If is it still open door? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's
yeah.
still, yeah, as long as it's open door, it's good.
Yeah, it's shared ride, open door, public transportation. Anybody could book it. That's still public transportation.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Good question though, because I can see that could be like, wait a minute. Yep. Any other questions? Before I move on? Just talking very quickly about how do you report this data? One thing we emphasize through these training webinars is that the real work happens before you open up PTN 128, right? PTN 128 is where the data goes into and ultimately you submit. But it's a form. It's a bunch of empty cells. If you don't have the information to start with, you won't have anything to put into the empty cells. So the real work starts by knowing what needs to be collected. What are the measures that are being asked for? How frequently do I have to collect them? Know that they have to be reported by mode. If there are any particular categories or line items that I have to report. That's the foundation of doing PTN 128 data reporting. If you've never used PTN 128 before, or you're really new to it, we recommend that you log in and you actually look at the worksheet so you have a better idea of the different line items that are supposed to be reported. Then you establish the processes and systems to ensure that you're collecting the data needed and ensuring that the data are reliable and valid and actually being collected. Because oftentimes, if you have a contractor maybe operating some of your service for you, the contract needs to specify that monthly data is going to have to be collected and submitted to you as the buyer so that you can actually submit your PTN 128 report. So always make sure that your contract specifies that. I'll highlight the words reliable and valid here also because just because you have a number doesn't mean it's accurate. And we'll get into this in the annual review process and quality control processes. Definitely do the work it takes to make sure the data are reliable and valid so that when it goes into the system, there's nothing that's wrong with the information. Even when it's in the system, review whatever data you're or even when you get the data from a system, review that it's collected accurately. We run into cases where the software systems that we are trusting to provide us with data are not counting things in the same way that the National Transit Database requires or PTN 128 reporting policy requires. Or there's some sort of problem with how the software was configured, and therefore the data you're getting is incorrect, right? So always review that data, make sure it looks accurate, it makes sense. Trends can be explained, percentage changes can be explained. And then lastly, is putting the data into PTN 128. And always look for those typos when you're submitting your annual report, because it's very easy to add an extra zero or to skip a place value somewhere, change a 5 to an 8, anything like that. So PTN 128 does calculate your totals for you. It's always good practice to compare the line item totals that you have in PTN 128 with what you expected to have for your year. In terms of the reporting timeline for PTN 128, I mentioned there's monthly data due, but you don't have to turn in data every month. The PTN 128 reporting timeline follows the state's fiscal year, which starts in September and goes all the way through August. You can see that quarter one of the fiscal year is September through November. Quarter two is December through February, and so on. So when you're submitting data to PTN 128, you should be submitting a quarter of data at a time, right? So at the end of quarter one, for example, which is September through November, your quarter one data is due the 30th of the month following the quarter. So in that case, quarter one's data is due December 30th. And when you submit by December 30th, you would be submitting September, October, and November monthly data. After that quarterly data is submitted, TTI sends out in the following month what's called a quarterly check report. Christina will be talking about those in one of the later modules in the last hour of today. That process repeats throughout the fiscal year. Also be aware that while you're submitting your data for a given fiscal year, there is the annual review period where we review the prior fiscal year's data. TTI goes through a process to ensure that data submitted for the prior fiscal year is accurate. And that's what we call the annual review, which we cover in the next to last module of today's workshop. And the reason that happens here, that October, November, December timeframe is, the fiscal year closed out by August. We're reviewing the data in September, October, November, December, and Public Transportation Division of TxDOT has to submit its NTD reports in January. And so that's where all of these things are kind of fleshing together. So that's the overview of the reporting timeline. Remember, as an agency, submitting every quarter by the 30th of the month following that quarter, and always be prepared for the annual review period. It'll always happen October, November, December. You're going to get our fun questions that I know everybody appreciates so much about the data and any things we see in the data. All right, so I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any questions about this overview of the reporting requirements, the what, the why, the how, the when. Any questions? Nothing in the chat or anything? Okay. Well, then I will proceed. And we are right on time so far, so that's good. So now we're moving to module 2. Now that you know the who, the what, the why, the when, and all that, let's get into some more information about the more detailed requirements. So in this module, we're going to walk through the fact that the data that you need to collect needs to be reported by mode and by urban versus rural. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. So the National Transit Database is what requires data to be reported by mode. So because the PTN 128 helps to comply with National Transit Database report requirements, PTN 128 data must be reported by travel mode. Now, the travel modes are actually defined by the National Transit Database, and the definitions of all the modes are beyond what we have time to go through today, but you can look them up in the NTD reporting glossary. It's available online. You can also look at the latest NTD reporting policy manual. Christina, do we include the mode definitions in the PT 128 policy manual as well?
Yes, we do.
All right. So that's where you can learn the mode definitions if you're not familiar with the terms like motor bus, commuter bus. Is this really a commuter bus? You have any of those kinds of questions? Check in those glossaries. PT 128 system has many travel modes. We tried to replicate almost all of the NTD modes, not every single one, because we don't have Alaska Railroad here in Texas, for example. But you can see the list here. Most transit agencies in Texas are operating either motor bus, right? That's fixed route bus service, demand response, so that's your 88 paratransit and general public dial-a-ride and your micro transit. Some agencies operate commuter bus, and then there's some light rail, some hybrid rail in the state as well. But otherwise, there's not very many of the other modes used across the state. We do have this travel mode called Other. You might have noticed that. And in some cases, we allow the use of the mode Other, but you really should consult with TTI if you're like, hey, these modes don't fit this service. Reach out to us. And if you're not sure what travel mode to use, before you just put data in the Other travel mode. You have the ability as a PTN 128 user to add travel modes. It's really a two-step process. When you log into PTN 128 and you go to a given fiscal year, there's a button that says add travel mode. You would just click that button and it'll ask you, well, what travel mode do you want to add? You select it from the drop-down and click the add button. You're also able to move data from one travel mode to another. Sometimes this happens where somebody might have put data in one travel mode and then realized after the fact that that was the wrong travel mode, or I need to move this from to something else. And so that's really a two-step process also, where you log into whatever worksheet you have has the data you want to move, and you click the little edit button. It looks like a pencil next to the travel mode dropdown, and then you select the button, I want to move values to another travel mode. You would select the travel mode and move the values. If you want to delete a travel mode, basically the same process. You would click the edit travel mode button, the little pencil next to the travel mode drop-down box, and then you would click the delete button. You see the big red caution at the bottom here, which is basically saying, hey, this cannot be undone. So make sure that if you're going to click the delete button, all that data is going to be gone. So make sure that that's exactly what you want to do. Right. All right, so that's the first bit about travel modes. If there's any questions about travel modes, there'll be some time at the end of this module we can unpack those. So your data has to be reported not only by travel mode, but also data has to be separated for data attributable to urban public transportation versus rural public transportation. So let's unpack that a little bit. If you're a transit agency that's fully rural, right? You don't serve an urbanized area, you don't have service of an urbanized area, this does not apply to you. If you're a transit agency that's fully urban and everything you do is inside an urbanized area and only incidental, maybe you have a little bit of service in the rural area, but it's less than 1%. This whole section doesn't really apply to you, but I'm going to walk through the ideas here. If you're a transit agency and you serve both an urbanized area or areas, in some cases, the transit agency serves multiple urbanized areas, and you have a rural area, there are requirements for separating urban data from rural data. Why? Well, because the funding formulas for urban and rural are different. And those funding formulas require rural data to go into the rural formula and urban data to go into the urban formula. So that's why reporters have to separate their data, urban versus rural. In the National Transit Database world, those of you submitting to NTD, only some data elements, annual totals, need to be allocated urban versus rural. So if you're an agency serving urban and rural area, if you're an agency that serves urban areas, you are required in NTD to submit a special form. It's called the FFA 10. Those of you that know what I'm talking about, you're like, yeah, that's the one, right? But that is only for certain data elements in NTD. PTN 128, on the other hand, is currently designed, wink, wink, new system won't be designed this way, currently designed that all urban data has to be reported separately from all rural data. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So if you are a transit agency and you are serving on behalf of a state-funded transit district, right? Like Brazos Transit District serves the rural areas that it serves, and it also serves the College Station Bryan large urban transit district, two different transit districts, one rural, one urban. If your transit agency falls into this kind of category, PT 128 requires you to do one of two things. The separate reports is sort of the most common practice right now. So this is the case that it does apply to agencies like BTD. I think Hill Country Transit District has this, Gulf Coast Transit District, right, where you have completely separate reports, what I call the separate report case, right? You have different transit districts, and you're filing a report for each transit district separately. All the monthly data by mode for both or all three of your transit districts. That's the most common practice. There are some transit agencies in the state of Texas that have to use program types, and this is a slightly different approach. This program types approach applies only to rural transit districts, and they don't have an urban transit district recognized by the state, right? So a rural transit district, but that also receives Section 5307 funds, or operates a non-incidental amount of urban service, and therefore has to report to NTD as an urban reporter. If you're a rural transit district and you fall into this category where you have to report to NTD as an urban reporter, then you use the program type dropdown. on your PT 128 report. And that's how you separate rural and urban data. So again, if you're a rural reporter, a rural transit district, but also a direct reporter to NTD because you serve an urban area or you receive 307 funding, at the top of your PT 128 worksheet, you should have this little drop down above the travel mode drop down that says program type. And for every mode that you report, you will also have to fill out the program type sheet for that mode, 2 program type sheets. One for what's called rural transit districts providing 5307 service. That's where the urban data would go. And a program type called state funded rural. That's where your rural data would go. If you are unsure if this applies to you, or you're confused about the idea of urban versus rural, or you're being asked by the somebody to become a direct reporter, et cetera, if you have questions about this, because it can get a little nuancy as you get into the weeds, obviously you can reach out to TTI or Public Transportation Division and then us in order to cover things here. Last question. Sometimes we get asked, well, how do I know how much data should be urban versus how much data should be rural? Because oftentimes you're using the same vehicles. You might be crossing these boundaries, right, as your services are going about. So how do I count like urban miles versus rural miles? So that might require you to have some sort of service allocation plan so that you can determine, well, how much of my service is urban versus how much is rural. It's going to require some GIS analysis probably to look at where your trips are occurring, if you have fixed routes, where do they fall, how much is urban, how much is rural, and then use that service data and use the GIS analysis in order to then allocate your PTN 128 data to your urban worksheets or your rural worksheets. That is far beyond the scope. You could do probably a 4-hour workshop just on that topic. But again, if you're not doing this and you fall into that urban rural category, definitely might want to reach out to us and get some more details on that topic. Okay, I'm going to pause there for questions. I know that was a lot. Travel modes and reporting data by urban versus rural. What questions are there among the group? Am I just that abundantly clear? No questions means I'm a great instructor, right?
Well, we can test the audio. You can hear me,
Yeah.
right?
I can hear you. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
That's good. All right. Well, I will keep going just to try to keep us on schedule. And that is the end of Module 2. We'll go to Module 3, which is reporting your operating data, in particular your hours and miles. This is one of my personal favorites. So let's get into it. So this agenda, we're going to talk about the different types of hours and miles data. Specifically, we're going to dive into what is deadhead, and we'll talk through a little bit of common issues when it comes to reporting hours and miles, and then also how do you check your data for reasonableness. When you're reporting the PTN 128, as a reminder, we're reporting hours and miles data for public transportation, only public transportation, not charter bus hours and miles, not dedicated school bus hours and miles, right? And the data that you're reporting is when I say hours and miles of what? It's the hours and miles of your vehicles, right? This is hours and miles data is not related at all to people. Hours and miles data is related to what the vehicles are doing. Okay, so that's one key concept when you talk about hours and miles data. And let's talk about the 4 different elements that we need from your vehicles. So the 4 data elements needed to be reported in PTN 128 are actual vehicle revenue hours, actual total vehicle hours, actual vehicle revenue miles, and actual total vehicle miles. So you see there's 2 measures for hours, 2 measures for miles. Let's unpack these just a little bit. So let's talk about the word actual. When we talk about the word actual, that means that we want you need to report what actually happened with your vehicles, right? Not what you scheduled your vehicles for. So the data that's reported to PTN 128 for hours and miles should be based on actual data collection of actual operations. That's one key concept. Second, I mentioned this already, that these hours and miles data are related to what the vehicle does, not people, not your drivers, not your passengers, right? This is all about the status of the vehicle. What is the vehicle doing? You can see when we talk about hours, we have this word revenue, right? Actual vehicle revenue hours versus total vehicle hours. Revenue hours or revenue miles is when your vehicles are in revenue service. That means that the vehicle is providing public transportation and is available to carry passengers. Revenue service includes things like, your revenue time, actually driving, if you're on fixed route, driving the route. Revenue service also includes things like layovers at the end of a fixed route line, right? That counts towards your revenue time because the vehicle is in revenue service. It is available there. On demand response, it gets a little bit more nuanced. We'll talk about that. And that's the revenue value you need to supply when the vehicle is providing public transportation. For the total value that you need to supply is your revenue. That's okay. Revenue service.
Whoa.
I'm not going to
You
live
said you
that
wanted to
one
keep
down.
it interesting, so
Yeah,
you did.
right. Yeah.
You have succeeded.
Okay. All right. Back to HIF. Okay. Revenue service plus deadhead. And let's unpack what that means 2 slides from now. So I use these long names, actual vehicle revenue hours and actual et cetera, to help explain or fully unpack the meaning of each of these terms. Just so you know that in PTN 128, what you're going to see is revenue hours. There's a line item that just says revenue hours, right? There's a line item that says total vehicle hours, revenue miles, total vehicle miles. Those are equivalents to those longer terms in the definitions I just walked through. So the revenue part seems pretty straightforward, right? That my vehicles are available to carry passengers in service, but how do I get the total? Remember that total is revenue plus deadhead, right? Revenue plus deadhead. And deadhead is something that's very specific. It is the operating time and the miles needed to move a vehicle into revenue service and out of revenue service. The vehicle, you have the driver, they're operating closed door, they're not picking up passengers, they're not available to pick up passengers, right? But they're either going to revenue service or from revenue service. For fixed route, deadhead is pretty easy because it's usually from the garage to the beginning of the route and then from the end of the route back to the garage. That's usually the deadhead time. Now, if you're deadheading between the end of one route to another route, like if you have a complex interlined fixed route system, there's additional sources of deadhead. But generally speaking, if the bus is pulling out, going into fixed route service, and then ends up coming out of fixed route service back to the garage, your deadhead is just those 2 points, out and in. And let's talk, I'll reiterate this point here on the next slide as well. You do not enter deadhead time into PTN 128. PTN 128 calculates it for you, but you are responsible for ensuring that your total hours and miles account for the correct deadhead, right? So you put in total and you put in revenue in PTN 128. Deadhead is calculated in PTN 128, but we have no idea if the deadhead is captured correctly. Only you know that because you have to follow the definition of deadhead in order to get to your totals that you do actually enter. For demand response service, deadhead can involve lots of different kinds of travel because the vehicles don't have a fixed route. So this can be from the garage to a dispatching point or to the first passenger pickup. It can be from your last scheduled drop off to the dispatching point, the last scheduled drop off, to the back to the garage. There's a lot of things that a demand response vehicle might do in a day where it ultimately should count as deadhead. All of these examples are provided in the PTN 128 reporting policy manual and the National Transit Database reporting manual. We follow the exact same definition for deadhead. So I have a graphic on the next slide for the most simplest case, just to kind of demonstrate that. I do want to point out before I go to that graphic is that your vehicles are going to have hours and miles on them that PTN 128 shouldn't see at all, right? These are your non-service related hours and miles. For example, driving a vehicle for maintenance testing, driving a vehicle for operator training, traveling to fuel vehicles. So if your drivers need to take the vehicle and take it off the route and go fuel it and then come back, maybe you're using gas stations, right, throughout the service area. Traveling to a scheduled lunch break, taking the scheduled lunch break. Those things do not appear in PTN 128 as deadhead or as revenue, and therefore we actually don't see them at all and shouldn't see those hours and miles. So in the simplest case, this graphic depicts what deadhead and revenue time is. If we have a vehicle's first stop that it serves in a day, that's where revenue service starts. It could be your first passenger pickup, right, on demand response. And everything between that first stop and that last drop off typically is revenue, counted as revenue, again, with the exceptions of, you're taking a demand response vehicle and you're taking it to a gas station or something in the middle of the day. Those hours and miles should not count towards revenue or deadhead. And that deadhead is usually that portion between the garage and that first stop, and then from the last drop off or last stop, and then the garage at pull in. That's the concept, simply put, but sometimes it can get complicated. Some of the issues we commonly see for related to hours and miles data think of this as things that you need to make sure, right? One is to be sure that you're excluding deadhead from your revenue hours and your revenue miles. So when you're reporting revenue hours and revenue miles in PT 128, there shouldn't be any deadhead in there. Make sure that when you're reporting your total hours and miles, you're excluding hours or miles that were related to training, maintenance, scheduled lunch breaks, fueling. Those things do not count as either deadhead or revenue, and so it should not be in PTN 128. I have the fourth bullet point here for demand response. You saw a couple of slides ago that it's like, wow, you mean there's first drop-offs and last pickups, and what if there's lunch breaks and all of that stuff? And just as a general rule of thumb, if you want to get the most accurate data from your demand response service, it's best to be recording hours and miles sort of stamps for each part of a vehicle's duty throughout the day. What was the odometer reading in miles at pull out? What was the odometer reading in miles at every pickup and every drop off? What is the odometer reading in miles when the vehicle is going out of service for fueling or for a lunch break and you pull the vehicle back in? Because if you just look at the odometer miles just at pull in and pull out, you're more likely to be incorrect. And you're going to have problems with getting accurate data. Another problem we sometimes see is that agencies are reporting hours assuming that driver pay hours are the same as vehicle hours, which they are not, right? So remember that hours and miles data is only about what the vehicles do. If you pay your drivers but your vehicles do nothing, then you have no revenue time and no total time, right? Make sure that you spend the time to verify miles and hours data from these automated systems. Anything that's giving you these estimates, it's good to go back and audit them. Make sure that you understand where the reports come from, how the reports get put together. Ask the vendor to walk you through the steps on how they generate a report so that you know that when you're inputting the data, you're getting full credit for the hours and the miles that you're actually operating. And of
There's
course,
a question, Michael.
yes. Sorry. Kelly, go ahead. Tell me what the question is.
I don't
Well,
know the question.
Oh,
Michael, this is Rip.
okay.
Hey, this is Rip. So I have back to the fuel thing and the demand response.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but that's a great. Can you go back to that slide with your graph?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in this time frame right here,
mm-hmm.
my driver makes a drop off and then goes to get gas in the middle of his day, in the middle of his run, you're telling me that time and those hours don't count?
Yes. By the definition in the National Transit Database, yes. Can you accurately capture that in your current setup? I don't know. And that's one of the things we've seen, Rep, in trying to implement this guidance. It's rather difficult because not every system is set up to capture each one of these legs, right? I don't know if yours is you would run into the same problem or not.
Oh, I year after year, I have the same issues on my PTN 128 with the 10% stuff and trying to figure out where. So this would explain probably some of it, because during the day, like I said, they go fuel. It's still in this time frame in this run. We're not taking that out. I can tell you that right now for sure. So now it's figuring out how to remove that out of the revenue hours. So, okay, I will.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I that's a very, very good question. And I won't ask you a specific question and during the annual review and say, Rep, did you get your fuel out of there? You know?
Oh, well, you can ask. I'm going to answer you that right now, no. Now going forwards, probably starting in the new year, we will start working on that before September 1 gets here to get to that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To try to start fresh. So, okay, thank you.
Makes sense.
Michael.
Yep.
We normally do ours at the end of shift, so that kind of cuts out that.
Yeah. So if you're right. If you're already deadheading, you're deadheading back to the garage and then the operator takes the vehicle for fueling. If it's on the way, you're not adding miles, right? Technically fueling doesn't count as deadhead either, right? So if you're taking a vehicle out of service to go fuel it, then whether you're in that revenue, like in this blue area, or you're in the deadhead, right? Where your deviation to go fuel and the time spent fueling the vehicle technically, and I am underlining the word technically, doesn't count as deadhead, doesn't count as revenue, and then shouldn't show up in your total hours or your total miles. I realize that may not always be super feasible. I'm sharing with you the definition. Do with that what you will in order to try to get it as accurate as you can. Okay, good questions. Any other questions on these definitions? Okay. Last thing is just checking data for reasonableness. And when you're inputting your hours and miles data, PTN 128 gives you a few indicators of potential problems. And one of the things we hear back often during the annual review is, why are you asking me about my speed, right? And the reason we're asking you about speed is because speed is simple. It's miles per hour. There's a common expectation about, for a given type of service, how fast your vehicles are driving on average. And if the miles or the hours data are incorrect, you're going to get funky speeds, right? So, the most extreme case, we got cases where the calculated speed, miles divided by hour, was like a rocket ship, right? Like 1,000 miles an hour. Well, that's obviously not correct. So the ratio of miles to hours was incorrect. So something is wrong there. You can also look at, in addition to the speed values calculated on the PTN 128 worksheet, you can look at your deadhead ratios. That's helping you to see what percentage of your total hours is deadhead. And you can look at these and say, well, is this really reasonable that half of the time my vehicles are out there in service, that they're in deadhead mode, right? Half of the time. So these might be indicators of potential problems in how the data is being captured. Maybe your vehicle hours, maybe your total is including things that it shouldn't be. Right? That means that you're adding in deadhead and then therefore maybe there's fueling in here. I don't know. Maybe there's training, hours or something else being accidentally calculated into your total, and that would increase your deadhead ratio to a value that maybe doesn't make sense. So always check these items because they're the first thing we look at during the annual review to say, hey, is this reasonable? It should be consistent over time, etc. I'll pause there for any other questions. Nancy, I see your comment about cross-mode vehicle usage. Yes, that's also a very, very good question. Feel free to reach out afterwards. We can always meet up with you to talk through some of those nuances if you're using the same vehicle across modes in a given day, how to handle that. All right. Well, I'm going to keep going to try to keep us on schedule. I'm a little behind, so we'll see how I do here. Module 4, the last module of the hour, is on unlinked passenger trips. So unlinked passenger trips, we'll walk through what does that mean, how do you count them, and what are some of these common issues that we have in the unlinked passenger trips data. Unlinked passenger trips is a long set of words that basically just means ridership. But it's important to understand that when you're counting passenger trips, you're counting every boarding on the vehicle. So if you have a passenger that gets on the vehicle at their origin, boards at their origin, gets off at a transfer point, and then gets on another vehicle, there's actually 2 boardings and therefore 2 passenger trips. And that's what we would count in this case. Even if it's the same person boarding twice on the same trip, each boarding counts as an unlinked passenger trip. So when you're reporting unlinked passenger trips, you include all passengers, regardless of how they pay for the trip. And you should include any attendants, companions, children, whether or not they are paying fares, because you're counting boardings, not fare collection. You should not count employees of the transit agency that are performing their job, right? So if a police officer gets on, or a mechanic gets on, or a vehicle operator is getting on, or a customer service agent gets on and they're doing their job, that's not a passenger, so that technically shouldn't be counted. And service animals also do not count as passengers. Now, when you're counting passenger trips, it's not enough just to count the boardings. You do have to disaggregate the data. We need to know the data, how much is urban boardings versus rural boardings. Again, if your agency serves both urbanized and rural areas, we have to count boardings by mode. How much is on demand response? How much is on fixed route, et cetera. And we have to count boardings by funding source. So in PT 128, you need to count your general public passengers, right, that are supported through 5307 or 5311, or just no special grant program. Count them separately from passengers that are specifically funded by different programs, and we'll unpack that in a little bit. And of course, you're counting this monthly. When we talk about recording and counting passengers by funding source, there are several lines in the PTN 128 worksheets, particularly lines 12 through 44, that lay out several different funding sources where you would report and count passengers. Line 12 is your general public. This is, those general people that you're picking up. There's no special funding source. You're using public transportation funds. Line 13 is section 5310. That only applies in some circumstances, right? Again, the person doesn't have to be a senior or a people with disabilities to be reported. That isn't the qualification of reporting a 5310 rider. A 5310 rider means that they are boarding because their trip is funded through the 5310 program. And that applies to all of these other line items. There's a couple other line items in there that some are not really used. You can ignore lines 15 through 16. The line 18 is the medical transportation program. So this is where you would report boardings related that were funded by NEMT trips or medical trips, right? NEMT trips. Usually in Texas, it's from a Medicaid NEMT broker. That's the most common example. So if you're providing sponsored service for a broker, that's where you would report those trips that are funded by that contract. There are other special programs that you might provide trips for in the state of Texas, including Line 19, Department of Aging and Disabilities. This is an old name. Now basically this line is for anything funded through an area agency on aging. You don't use 22 and 23 pretty much. 23, 22 don't use, that's depreciated. It'll go away in the new system. You might also have trips that are funded by different local contracts. And we ask that you report those in these lines 24 plus. And you have to add a line if you have other types of local contracts that are not in the other lines. And just remember that charter service, dedicated school bus trips, and other boardings that are not related to public transit are not reportable to PTN 128. There's lots of different ways you can actually collect boardings data, from techie ways to old school ways. I don't really get into this too much. Most agencies by now are counting riders and they know how to count boardings. You might be using an FTA compliant sampling plan. Just remember that in general, the guidance is to provide a 100% count, i.e. count every boarding on every vehicle that counts. If it's available and reliable, you should be trying to count. You should be reporting your 100% counts.
The question in the chat, Michael. Sorry.
Yes. Sorry, I can't see the chat. You want to read it out loud for me, Kelly?
Yes. For line 13, 5310, we have vehicles en route that were bought with 5310 funding. Do these passengers need to be reported separately on line 13?
Christina, I'm going to maybe punt that one to you.
When I saw your question pop up, I think that was Nancy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I saw your question pop up, I actually had already written the same question for me to follow up on. I believe that if you are able to identify the service that is being provided, the trips that are being provided are truly on a 5310 funded service, meaning you may not be getting 5310 operating funding, but you purchased the vehicle with 5310s, then that would be reported as 5310.
Okay.
But I'll double check on that.
All right. Thank you.
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
Great. Good question, Nancy. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, Kelly. So yeah, these are your two methods, 100% or a sample. If you're doing sampling, just make sure you're following NTD guidance. When it comes to sampling, there are specific requirements for how to randomly sample for unlinked passenger trips. You can find those requirements on the National Transit Database website. You can your own data for reasonableness when it comes to unlinked passenger trips. For every mode, compare this year-to-date total to last year-to-date total and see if the difference makes sense to you. Is it something that you can explain? The PTN 128 also calculates several different ratios for you to look at. Most notably, line 49 is the best one. The one I always look at is the passengers per revenue hour, right? This is the boardings per hour that vehicles are in revenue service. That shouldn't change too significantly from year to year, right? And so if you're looking at that value and you see that your passengers per revenue hour have significantly changed, or you can't explain the trend, that might mean that there's a data quality problem. Okay, I don't have a question slide. I should have. Is there any other questions on counting boardings? All right. Well, I am 3 minutes behind schedule, but that's not too bad for me, to be honest. So I'm pretty happy. I still want to give you all a 5-minute break. So it's about 10:03. I'm gonna shut my mic off and camera off, and we'll come back and get started again at 10:08 or so. So see you back then.
in the PTN 128 site where we can see these videos and that sort of stuff. I use Shell software, which I know there was a deal about Deadhead. There was questions. I want to share the video with him instead of me trying to explain it to him so he gets exactly what you're asking. So can I download the video, or how does that work?
Christina, when the recordings are posted, are they posted as video files or are they YouTube links?
YouTube links.
Fantastic. Okay.
And we'll send out a notice to everyone when the recording is posted and also when the slides are posted, so that you're aware that stuff's up there and able to be rewatched and shared.
Gotcha.
Great. I believe we're about ready to get started again, and I really appreciate y'all coming back to us here. I also wanted to mention that I know that the information is coming at y'all pretty fast. We are trying to fit as much as we can into only 3 hours, and feel free that at any point that you have a question you want to ask, you can add it to the chat, or I'm going to ask Kelly to put the email addresses for Christina and myself in the chat as well. So if something's coming up along the way and you're like, I really need more info on that, you can shoot Christina and or I an email, and we'll be happy to set up a sidebar with you and walk you through in more detail any of these topics, because I know that it can be a lot. And again, the reporting policy manual does cover these topics also. So just keep those things in mind as we move along. Reach out to us if you have any questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Christina to get us going on Module 5.
All righty. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to move on to Module 5, which is the fleet and mechanical failures information. So in this module, we're going to go over just the different data elements of your fleet data, as well as more information on mechanical failures and what's reportable and what is not reportable. So for reporting the total number of revenue vehicles, keep in mind that revenue vehicles are those that are used to carry passengers, including vehicles that are used by a contractor to provide the service. So these are vehicles, there are two different lines to report your fleet information. One is going to be for revenue vehicles that you own and revenue vehicles that are contracted. So there are also, if your agency has rail or commuter rail vehicles, there are separate lines to report on those. Now, keep in mind when you are reporting on your vehicles that are owned and your contractor vehicles, if they are dedicated to your service, you want to make sure that you are including your active vehicles as well as your inactive vehicles. So when you're reporting your total vehicles owned, that information should be relatively stable. So, you're really it's not going to fluctuate. The number of vehicles that you own is not going to fluctuate based on how many vehicles you have on the street on that particular day. So that is a separate reporting field, which we will cover in just a moment. So your VOMs, which is also in PTN 128 referred to as your peak vehicles, that is your vehicles operating at maximum service. So this is the number of vehicles, the maximum number of vehicles that you needed to have on the street at the same time in order to meet your service demand. So you have a number of ways that you can track this. You can look at your at the vehicles that you have scheduled to be out on the road for demand response. You can look at, a lot of times you can use your software system. So your dispatching system will usually have a way of reporting your VOMs. One thing to keep in mind is that you'd want to exclude any atypical days. So if you have some special mitigating circumstance, some special thing that's one-time thing going on, you wouldn't count that, because it would really skew your numbers. So your some considerations on your fleet information. The size of your fleet and your VOMs may change. VOMs are typically going to be a little more fluid, so you could see that your VOMs change from month to month. Your fleet information, as mentioned, it's usually not going to be changing as frequently. That's really, you're going to see those changes when you are adding vehicles, if you've purchased vehicles or you've disposed of vehicles, because keeping in mind this is the number of vehicles that you own. On your rail agencies, when you're reporting your vehicles, you're going to include your passenger cars as well as the locomotive. So you make sure that you add that as well. Revenue vehicle counts do not include service vehicles. So like if you have a road supervisor, a vehicle for that purpose, you wouldn't count that. Any personal vehicles. And then you also don't count any vehicles that are non-dedicated. So for example, if you have a contract with a TNC company for overflow, or with a taxi company for overflow, you would not count those vehicles. Just as with many of the other data elements that are reported for your operating service, your vehicle counts are going to be reported by month, by mode, and also between urban and rural in PTN 128. So here is a screenshot of what PTN 128 looks like today. So you will have your line to report the vehicles that are owned, the vehicles that are contracted, your light rail vehicles and your commuter rail, as well as your peak vehicles. Now, one thing I did want to point out is peak vehicles, or VOMs. In the past, that was an optional field. Starting with fiscal year 2026, it is no longer an optional field, it is required. Actually, we may have started that in 25. So just in case you kind of have that in your mind from historical reference, it's now required. It's not optional anymore. Okay. So now we're going to talk about mechanical failures. So when we're talking about mechanical failures, I want to clarify by saying reportable mechanical failures. So this does not represent every mechanical component that has, broken down and you had to fix. That is not necessarily what we are looking for. Reportable mechanical failure is going to result in the vehicle not being able to complete its scheduled revenue trip, or the vehicle not being able to start its next scheduled trip. So if you have a vehicle that you had a crack in the windshield that you had to get replaced, but it did not result in any interruption in service, and it was replaced on the downtime, then that is not considered a mechanical failure. Revenue vehicle maintenance mechanical failures are reported in two different categories. One is going to be the major mechanical system failures and the other mechanical system failures. So major mechanical system failures are mechanical elements that break down that prevent the vehicle from moving. So that's going to be something like, your brakes break down, your doors, the engine, coolant, anything that it creates a safety hazard, and it has disabled the vehicle and it can no longer be complete the trip. This is separate from other mechanical failures. So with an other mechanical failure, this is a situation where your agency may have a policy in place that says, if this particular component breaks down, we choose to pull that vehicle out of service and put a different vehicle in. But technically, the vehicle could complete the trip. So, for example, especially in Texas, if the air conditioner goes out, many agencies have policies that say if the air conditioner has gone out, we are going to take that vehicle out of service. And but technically, the vehicle could continue on and complete its trips. So that would be an example of another mechanical failure. So common issues with mechanical failure reporting, making sure that your contractors, if you're purchasing your service from another entity, make sure that they are understand the data definitions. Making sure that you're not reporting any collisions. So if your vehicle was involved in a wreck and was not able to complete its trip, that is not considered a mechanical failure. So that is not the same thing.
Christina, there's a question in the chat.
Okay. Could you read it out?
Yes. For rail on NTD, we double our VOMS for 2 rail cars in service for a trip. But in PTN, we do it singular as 1 rail car for a trip. Is this correct, or should it match what we do in NTD? This affects car miles and car revenue hours. Those are doubled in NTD as well.
Yeah, I actually had a question like that. I'm not sure if this is the same person, but I just had another question come in just recently, and I have not yet had a chance to research that. I don't have the answer readily available for you, but I will look into that and get that information for you. That's a new concept for me.
That was from Jane. So Jane, if you drop your email to us, or I think I can find it in your registration, we'll make sure that we get back to you on that.
Yep. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions on fleet data or mechanical failures? Okay. If not, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the exciting world of financial data. So I know this is everybody's favorite, right? Except for Michael's, we've already established.
Of course it is. Oh yeah, I like hours and miles. Yeah, right,
exactly.
right.
Okay. So, so when you're reporting financial data in PTN 128, a few of the things that you want to keep in mind is that your data should only be representative of costs that were incurred to support public transportation services. So this means that if you incurred costs related to charter or dedicated bus services, just like with what Michael had explained earlier, that information is not included in PTN 128. So you want to make sure that you have a way of excluding that from your report. On the data that's reported, you'll be reporting your revenues, your expenses. So revenues is basically all of the funds that were applied to support those expenses that were incurred to provide your services. And then, of course, your expenses are all costs associated with providing your public transportation services and managing the transit agency. One thing to keep in mind that has caught a few agencies by surprise in the past is that you want to make sure that you report all costs. So PTN 128 is not a grant management tool. So this is a completely different reporting concept. So some agencies in the past have thought that they were under the impression that the only thing they needed to report was grant funded activity, and that is not the case. So even if you have some services that your agency wholly funds using local funds, you still report all of that in PTN 128. And then on the revenue side, you are going to be reporting the revenues that are used to support those costs. We'll get into that a little bit more here in just a minute. So on all of your financial reporting, you'll want to make sure that you are reporting on an accrual basis of accounting. So this is on a full accrual basis of accounting, which means that you're going to be matching your revenues and expenses for the services that were provided and the passenger served. So everybody having reporting their data on the same reporting basis, it allows us to have relevant comparisons among different agencies. So if people were reporting on different accounting bases, then that information wouldn't be as valuable. So if your agency is using a cash basis or a modified accrual basis, which is very common with your local governments, you'll want to make sure that you are reporting, in PTN 128 according to a full accrual accounting system. So that means that you're going to have to do some, some schedules on the, kind of outside of your system to make sure that you're able to meet that reporting requirement. So your expenses are to be reported as they are incurred, which means when the goods are received or the services are performed, not when the invoice is paid. So if, for example, if you purchase transportation and that purchase transportation provider, provides service in the month of July and they invoice you for that in August and you don't pay it until September, you're still going to report those expenses in the month of July because that is when the related services were performed. For revenues, the revenues are going to be reported as they are earned, or technically, I guess I'm trying to find an easier way of explaining it. So your revenues are going to follow the incurred expenses. So in the example that I just gave, if the agency, your purchase transportation provider provided those the services and you incurred that cost, and you know that you're going to be billing that cost to your 5307 or 5311 program, then you are going to make sure that you are reporting your revenues alongside the same month as the expenses that those revenues are going to be supporting, even if you haven't billed for them yet. And so I know that there are some cases in which maybe you haven't, for any of those agencies that are utilizing FTA's pre-award authority provision, which means that you're able to incur the cost, but you're not able to bill for them right now. You don't have your grant in place, but you're still able to use those funds to support that. You're still going to make sure that you report those grant funds as supporting those costs. So if you have any questions on that, we can unpack that a little more, either later at the end of this session or offline. I know a lot of agencies have asked about reporting all of their funds. Unfortunately, the system is designed to make sure that your revenues and your expenses equal each other. So you should be reporting the funding, the revenues that are used to support the expenses. So at the end of the month, you have a reasonableness check where you verify that your expenses and revenues balance out. So you should have a zero balance at the end of the month. And there
Christina,
is some flexibility.
Oh, sorry. We have another question in the chat.
Okay.
Oh, this is from Jessica. We sell tickets for rides on our paratransit services. NTT has asked that we only record this transaction when the ticket is redeemed, but our tickets have no expiration. Is this the same for PTN?
So, yeah. So I will say that is technically the correct way to report. However, I will say in PTN 128, we have not required that level of detail, just because it is very difficult to have agencies, implement where you're going to be recording your revenue as like maybe a deferred revenue and then not recognizing it until those tickets are redeemed. So that is not something that has been enforced. So technically, yes, it should be done that way. But if your agency does not have the capacity or the ability to track and report it at that level, then we're okay. There may be, that may cause that, like in a month where you have a large amount of ticket sales and not a lot of, trips to go along with that may, cause some questions, but we'll document that in your annual review. Any other questions? Or did that help? Okay, thank you. I didn't realize this was here. So this is an example of the reasonableness check. So you can see that your revenues are exceeding your expenses, so you have a balance here. So this is what you want to make sure that this line here is a 0.
Hey, Christina, there was a question in the chat that I did answer, but I want to reiterate that in the past, I know that we've given guidance, like we wanted your monthly data, expenses and revenues to try to balance, right? I think we've realized over the years here that it's not really a reasonable requirement that monthly, that every single month, every single mode, revenues and expenses balance. The standard is that at the mode level, at the end of the year, right, your total mode fiscal year report, revenues and expenses reported will balance to 0. So just to clarify that point for everybody.
All right.
Oh, yeah, I have a comment here. Emmanuel Tutan from Cap Metro Austin. Can you delve on that? Revenues must equal expenses. I don't think that's the case. We don't have, we can have revenues more than expenses or vice versa, and we never tie. So I'm not sure what we're trying to do here.
Right. And I know, so in one of the things that I will say is that in with the reporting for PTN 128, it is designed to, just to have those two balance. Now, for example, if you're, you want to make sure that you're referencing what the end source of those funds would be. So like even from a cash flow perspective, it may not balance. But if you would normally, like say, for example, with your sales tax or something like that, if you would normally be using your sales tax to pay, to cover these particular expenses, but you don't have those sales tax funds in yet, then you can still report that as sales tax so that you make sure that you balance. Does that make sense?
If that's the way we're supposed to do it, that makes sense. But we've never done that in all the years we've reported, and that has never been a problem. We've never been asked by TTI, TexDOT, or anyone to modify our submission. So I don't know if we need to take that offline or not, but we've never done it this way.
Yeah, you are correct. And in that, with the MTAs have been the exception. For another, one thing like the annual review process that we talk about, we don't do that with MTAs. So MTAs are kind of in a world of their own, so to speak. So those requirements have not been enforced on MTAs. So other agencies.
So should we continue the way we're doing it then?
I would say for right now, go ahead and continue doing your reporting as you have in the past. And if anything needs to change, we'll let you know.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There's a follow-up question in the chat. Oh, Michael's answering it.
Yeah, okay. You can. I answered it, I think. Whitney can always follow up with me if we have more questions.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the revenue data section, which is module 6. So in this module, we're going to go over the revenue types, talk about the federal programs, the state programs, the different types of passenger fares, and other local sources of funds. So on your revenues, so this is, again, kind of, we've already touched on this. This is basically the revenues that are used to support the expenses that you're reporting in your PTN 128 report. So this is not going to include any revenues from non-public transportation programs. And it's also not going to include any revenues for like public transportation related revenues that were earned in the reporting period but not applied. So that's kind of that if you earned revenues that weren't needed, it was in excess of what you had needed for that month, then you wouldn't report in excess. Revenues are going to be reported by mode, by month, separated between urban and rural, and by the source of the funds. So there are three main categories of revenue in PTN 128. So that's going to be your federal, your state, and your local. On the federal side, you're going to see like your usual suspects in the FTA world. So you're going to see 5307, 5311, 5339, 5310, you know, those main revenue streams. There are a couple that are being removed. So like your 5316, 5317, those are no longer valid. There's one line for the 5311 contract revenues. It's very uncommon for that to be utilized. So if you are for some reason that you would need to be, please reach out to us before you start doing so. The 5307 and 5311 CARES, CRISA, ARP, so all of that stimulus funding, that is actually about to be going away in the new system. Even though agencies may have that funding and they're using that out, the programs are being phased out, so we'll have other ways to report that in the future. The one thing that
Christina?
we have, yeah.
Oh, sorry. James Oliver pointed out that 5337, that's what state of good repair, is it?
Yes.
Yep. Where do we have people report 5337 revenues?
That is an issue that we have in the current system that will be resolved in the new system. So I'm happy. I was actually just about to talk about that. So I'm glad that the timing of that question is impeccable. It's great. So that is one of the challenges that we have in the current PTN 128 system is that we have if you have those, then you can reach out to us with you on finding that would be appropriate for you. We don't want to commingle any funds, so it's not like there's a one line fits all kind of thing. We want to keep it separate just so that we are able to identify that afterwards, and we'll have to notate it on the side. It is not ideal, but that's all we have. But in the future, in the new system, there will be places where you can report like other federal funds or other FTA funds. So similar to what's in NTD right now. So thank you for that question.
Thanks, Christina.
On the state side, so the state programs in that category, so we've got your urban state and your rural state. That's your funding that you get, transit districts get from TxDOT. There is, similar to what Michael had said earlier about the Department of Aging and Disabilities, that program technically no longer exists, but that is where you would reflect your any funding that you get from Area Agency on Aging. Head Start is not really commonly used, so I haven't seen anything on that coming through. And DARS is obsolete, so that is no longer there. So you wouldn't be reporting anything in that category. Now, just as with the federal side, we have the same issue on the state side. It's not as common, but if you have another source of state funding, like maybe TCEQ or something like that, that you're not sure where to report that, then reach out to us and we will assist you with finding a place to report that. Again, in the new system, there will be a place for you to report other state funds that don't fit into any of these main categories. Okay, on passenger fares, so technically there are two separate types of passenger fares. So you've got your passenger paid fares, which is pretty straightforward. It's the fares that the passengers pay on their own behalf. It's either on the bus, pre-purchase ticket sales, anything like that, and it still includes any full half fares, special fares, anything like that. All of that is still considered passenger paid as long as the passenger is the one who's funding, paying for that. Organization paid fares, on the other hand, is fares that are paid by an organization rather than the passenger. So in this case, it's going to be an organization that's paying for an affiliated specific group of individuals, not just a general class of people. So examples include if an employer pays for the fares, for their employees, or if a doctor's office purchases ticket books to give out to their patients. So those are some examples of organization paid fares. Passenger fares, so either passenger paid or organization paid fares that does not include fare subsidies provided by governments. So when we're looking at revenue from sponsored service, most revenues from sponsored service are organization. The exceptions that we have, so we've got Medicaid, the Medicaid Transportation Program revenues, that is reported on a separate line. Technically, in NTD, it is reported as organization paid fares. So any of those agencies who are reporting directly to NTD, you may be reporting it as organization paid fares in NTD. In PTN 128, you will continue to report them separately. And the same thing for the area agency on aging. So we've got separate reporting lines for those, both of those. One of the things to keep in mind is that, and this is, I know this strikes a lot of concern with agencies when they have these, sponsored services and they're getting revenues for this. Agencies have expressed hesitation for reporting it as organization paid fares out of concern for but we use this as, so one thing that the data that is reported in PTN 128 again is not a grant management tool, and it has no bearing on match eligibility. So that is not what is being that's not the purpose of having it reported here. So just wanted to let agencies kind of rest at ease on that. Just because you have some sponsored service revenue that is reported as organization paid fares, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's impacting your match eligibility. So PTN is not going to be looking at that and then coming back and asking you questions. One of the things that we mentioned earlier was the for local government. So fare subsidy is not considered passenger fares. One thing to keep in mind is that this is usually like a situation where you have a local government who is providing a fare subsidy to support a general class of people. So it's not like affiliated individuals or specific, it's just kind of in general. So that kind of sets it aside from that organization paid fare. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the other local funds. So there are a number of different line items to report local funds in PTN 128 now. So you have your general local contributions, which is going to be just kind of like, general revenues from the entity to purchase or to support your services. Contributed services, we'll talk a little more about that in just a moment. Your sales tax, auxiliary transit revenues, other transportation revenues, non-transit related revenues, and local contracts. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on this, but I do want to point out that your auxiliary transit revenues, other transit revenues, non-transit related revenues, and local contracts in the new system are all going to be reported together. So this level of detail that we get into, that even though yes, in in the USOA and in NTD guidance, they have they separate each of these. We will not be doing that in the future. So, just keep that in mind as you're going through with the reporting, that these will no longer be reported separately. Contributed services, this reporting line, it is a little bit misleading because it's not really just services. This is a line that is designed to record either contributed services or receipt of non-cash assets. So if somebody donated a vehicle to you, then we want to capture that value. So you want to make sure that you are you have a very established value calculated that is defensible to report that. And so you want to make sure that also that it is necessary for public transit. So not just, any random asset or service. It has to be related to your transit services. But the most common that I see is an agency that may have office space donated by another entity. Other transportation revenues. So you may have, if you do provide charter services, so you do not report charter services, right? But you can, if you do offer charter services and you earn revenues and you use those revenues towards your normal general public transportation service, then you would report that as other transit revenues. And in the future, it would just be under that one general line. So that, I know that's can be a very confusing situation where we're saying you don't report charter, but those funds that are earned from that charter service can be used to support your public transportation services. And same thing that with the exclusive, the school bus and your freight tariffs. I haven't seen any of that come through, but it is possible. So going back to your charter services and your school bus operations and the prohibitions on that, FTA has that guidance on their website. So on local contracts, the main use, this is from selling service that meets the criteria for purchase transportation, which we'll discuss more in the expenses module. So typically, all of your contract revenues are going to be reported as organization paid fares, except for your Medicaid medical transportation program and your area agency on aging funding. So if when we introduced the organization paid fares line here recently, a lot of agencies shifted from reporting revenues from as local contracts to the organization paid fares. There are still some agencies that are reporting local contracts, and we will probably be going through and working with agencies just to make sure that we understand all of the different nuances. It can get very sticky when looking at the definitions when the USOA and NTD guidance on how to report some of these different relationships. So we will be, we can follow up with you. And if you have questions on one, you can always reach out to us, and we'll work with you to make sure that you're reporting it correctly. All right. Are there any questions on this information? I think there were a couple of them that came out.
I think in terms of the chat, I've been responding to those that I've seen pop up in the chat. I'm not sure I don't think we missed anything. But yeah, if there's any other questions we haven't addressed in the chat, anybody wants to raise, feel free to do so.
Okay. All right.
Looks like we're good, Christina.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and move forward then. Okay. So so now we're going to go ahead and talk about the financial data. So in this module, we're going to go over the different expense types. We're talking about the expense functions, a little more information on purchase transportation, and talk about capital expenses. So what expenses need to be reported? Again, this is going to be all expenses that are related to the provision of public transportation services. Again, you want to make sure that you are reporting everything, even if it was not grant funded, if it was locally funded, if it wasn't allowable on a grant, you're still going to be reporting those costs. You want to make sure that you're reporting the fully allocated cost of providing your services. That's going to be all of your direct and your indirect costs. Things that you would not include are going to be expenses that were incurred to provide things such as your operating your charter services, exclusive school bus, any of those that are non-public transportation services. And same thing with if an agency has another non-public transportation program such as senior housing. So you would not include those expenses. So all expenses are reported by mode, by month, separated between urban and rural, similar with the operational data that we talked about earlier. And it's also going to be reported by the category, which is like the type or the function. So here you can kind of see a chart where we've got your total public transportation expenses is basically going to break into what are your operational expenses and your capital expenses. So under operational, that's where you're going to see your functions. We have operating, maintenance, administrative, planning, and purchase transportation. On your chart of accounts, so in an agency's, within an agency's financial system, ideally there's going to be a way for your financial system to allow you to track your cost and report on your cost according to the categories and functions that you need to report to PTN 128 and or NTD if you're a direct reporter. So one of the things that is very common is that an agency is, that's part of a larger organization. So if, like, say, for example, if you're part of a county and, transit is not the county's primary manner of business, then, chances are the chart of accounts is not necessarily going to be, redone in order to align with USOA. So in those cases, you'll want to make sure that you have mechanisms in place to make sure that you translate the agency's chart of accounts to the reportable categories for PTN 128 reporting. So keep in mind that the PTN 128 functions represent how a cost was used, not what it was. The functions align with typical like a typical transit agency or chart. So you've got your organization chart. So your operations, your maintenance, your planning. So those, there's usually a strong alignment there. In PTN 128, the functions, the main categories that we have are operating, maintenance, which includes vehicle maintenance and facility maintenance, administrative, planning, and purchase transportation. So one of the things with vehicle and facility maintenance, keep in mind that you want to make sure that you are reporting in these categories according to the nature of the expense. So these are not grant ALI categories, not where did you, what kind of grant ALI did you charge those expenses to? This is about the nature of the expense. And we'll talk about this a little more in the next slide. So your operating expenses are going to be expenses related to like dispatch, operating your vehicles, fuel, etc. Your maintenance is going to be all expenditures related to vehicle and facility maintenance. So this is any kind of preventive maintenance or corrective maintenance. All of that is under the same line. Your administrative costs are going to be, like your normal management, accounting, office supplies. We have a note here, all insurance costs are reported as administrative. So again, even if you bill them as an operating cost on a grant, that doesn't dictate how it gets reported in PTN 128. And then, of course, there's planning, which is expenditures associated with like any kind of long-term, your regional and coordinated transportation plans, financial plans, etc. Purchase transportation. So we have two different lines for purchase transportation. One of them is going to be cost related to purchase transportation from a non-transit district. So this is going to be like if you're purchasing transportation from Transdev or MV or something like that, that's where you're going to be reporting those costs. The next line is purchase transportation from a transit district. And so this is if you're purchasing transportation from another transit agency, that is where you're going to be reporting that. So in the new PTN 128 policy manual, we provided additional information and guidance on what constitutes purchase transportation. This information has been taken directly from the NTD reporting manual because we are aligning, the PTN 128 does align with NTD in this respect. So in order for a relationship, a contract with another entity to be considered purchase transportation, there has to be a written agreement. It's signed by each. The agreement has to make sure that it outlines all of the expectations. So it's basically that you're going to be paying for a rate, a certain rate. They're going to be providing certain services during, for that. The big catchers are that the rate that is paid, what you're paying for that provider should be designed to cover the provider's cost of providing that service. So if your rate is, for example, designed to cover 80% of their costs, then that is more than likely not a purchase transportation relationship. If that other entity is expected to cover a portion of those costs. And the other main difference here that we've seen in some situations is that the service must be branded under the buyer's name. So like if you are purchasing transportation from another entity, then that entity must be providing service in vehicles that are branded with your name and your brand, not providing service under their own name. So those are some of the, I guess, differentiating factors that we've come across over the past year that have really, we've been looking at a lot of these relationships and determining that some of these relationships that have been reported as purchase transportation in the past are not, don't meet the definition of purchase transportation. So if you're going through and you're looking at your own personal purchase transportation contracts, if you look at this and you're looking in this guidance and you're thinking maybe this doesn't, maybe we don't meet all of these qualifications, reach out to us so that we can help you to determine what's the best way to report those expenses. So when you do purchase transportation, you want to make sure that you're going to include all of the costs that are billed by your provider to provide those services. You want to make sure that you're reporting the purchase transportation cost only those that are being billed by the provider. So if, for example, if somehow or another your purchase transportation provider says, hey, our costs have increased and, we had to pay more, we're operating on a deficit or something like that, you're not expected to have them give you that information of what those costs are that they covered on their own. You're only going to be reporting what they have actually billed you. And you also want to make sure that if your agency is the only way that services are provided are through a purchase transportation provider. When you're reporting your expenses, you're generally going to be reporting, also for any kind of administrative expenses that you're incurring to oversee that contract, or any additional costs that you are reporting or that you're purchasing directly, not through your purchase transportation provider. So, for example, if you are purchasing marketing services, and then you would be reporting that as an administrative cost, not as part of your purchase transportation cost.
Hey, Christina.
Yes.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but I did want to, several of you, Kelly posted a poll in the chat. You might have gotten it. Not you, Christina, necessarily. Okay. But the poll was asking, in case anybody's like, where did this poll come from? The poll was asking if you were willing to extend the time from 12, which is when we're scheduled to be done, to 12:15 in the event that we do need more time or need to give a longer break. Wanted to get the opinions of the group. So you should have received, or you should see in the chat, a poll that asks you that question. We've had 22 responses so far. That's about half of the attendees. So if other attendees could, while Christina continues talking about purchase transportation reporting, if if you can fill out that poll, that gives us a feel for whether we have that grace 15 minutes from the group. Sorry to interrupt, Christina. Back to you for adjusting for fares.
Okay. Okay, so on your purchase transportation contracts, when you're reporting those expenses, you want to make sure that you're including the fares for your purchase transportation services. So for examples, we have some agencies who their arrangements with their purchase transportation provider mean that the provider is kind of retaining those the purchase transportation or the fares, and they're not billing the agency for that. So we want to make sure that you're actually including the gross cost of the service, not the net amount that is paid to the purchase transportation provider. So in this example here, for example, it shows that the purchase transportation expense was $15,000, and there were $2,000 in fares that the seller retained. And so the invoiced amount that they sent to you was for $13,000. That's what you actually paid to the provider. So what you're going to report in PTN 128 is going to be the full cost of that $15,000, and then you're also going to report that $2,000 as passenger paid fares, even though they didn't send them to you directly. The other adjustment that is made for purchase transportation is when you're adjusting for capital expenses that are related to that contract. So if your purchase transportation provider, if the rate that you are paying them includes monetary compensation for capital cost related to vehicles or facilities cost, then you're going to want to have a portion of that reported as less capital expenses in purchase transportation line. So this is something in PTN 128 that allows you to basically reduce the operating cost by the amount that is actually more attributed to the capital components of your purchase transportation costs. So if the purchase transportation rate does not include, if your transit provider is not providing vehicles and they are not providing any facilities or anything like that, then you would not be reporting anything in the less capital expenses and purchase transportation line. So here, in the event that the purchase transportation rate does include compensation for vehicles or facilities, then the amount that you put in there is either going to be based on if they've itemized that in the negotiated rate so that you have that directly, or you can use an estimated percentage of the capital cost. In PTN 128, the most common that we use is just a standard 10%. So again, that is only, if you enter 10%, that is basically just the amount that is you can report without having any other justification for that. So here is a table that is provided that has the amount of, or the percent that can be used, kind of that, like those standard percents. So like I mentioned, if you have a standard turnkey contract where the transit provider is providing the maintenance, the vehicles, and the service, then a standard 10% can be utilized for that less capital and purchase transportation line. So on your capital expenses and assets, so this is going to be any expenses related to the purchase of vehicles, facilities, or equipment. It also, like any kind of capital vehicle rehabilitation cost would be reported as capital. These are your tangible property and equipment with a useful life of 1 year and an acquisition cost of $10,000 or more, or the capitalization value that is used by the agency, if it's lower. So if you'll remember, the capitalization threshold used to be 5,000 and it was increased to 10,000, I believe October 1 of 2024. All right, and so the operational expenses eligible for capital reimbursement. So this is in some of your grant guidelines, you have costs that are truly operational in nature, but they are reimbursed at a capital rate. For example, your preventive maintenance. So if your agency is billing preventive maintenance cost to a grant and getting a capital reimbursement rate, that is still not going to be reported as a capital expense. So make sure that you are reporting those as operating expenses in the maintenance line. And if you have any other questions on your capital assistance spent on operations, you can look at the FTA's circulars. All right. Are there any questions?
Christina, I'm watching the chat. I don't see any in yet. It looks like we've addressed everything that's come through in the chat so far.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So Christina, thank you very much for walking us through the mechanical, and then the financial data. For all those accountants out there that just love talking about revenues and expenses and encumbrances and schedules and all of those things. We are at our second break. We're only running a little bit behind schedule, but I think what I'd like to do for the group is to give everybody maybe a 8 to 10 minute break at this point. So those of you who need to use the restroom and need a little bit extra time can do that. We could reconvene around 11:15, 11:17. We'll probably get started around then. Based on the poll, everybody that responded, this is the power of voting, everybody that responded said they'd be willing to go to 12:15. So I think that is our current plan of action. That way we're not rushing through or shortchanging you all on this break. So see you again. We'll start around 11:15, 11:17, around that time frame. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the last hour of our PT 128 training session. We have we'll start with module 8. So continuing the concept of financial data, but unpacking a little bit about how to allocate expenses and revenues in order to comply with PTN 128 reporting. So this module talks about two different kinds of allocation, both cost allocation and revenue allocation. So let's unpack each of these in turn. As Christina mentioned, that in PTN 128, you should be reporting all of your public transportation expenses, whether they are allowable or unallowable. That way you're capturing, and by unallowable and allowable, we mean allowable to be reimbursed through a grant, right? Like a federal grant. So you should have all your expenses for public transportation. That way you're capturing the total cost of providing public transportation service, transit service. Once you have all those costs, though, you're likely going to need some sort of different cost allocation plans in order to report your costs correctly. And there's many different kinds of cost allocation, and I won't go into all of that right now, but just to give you some ideas here, you might have costs from another department of the organization that you're in that you should be reflecting in PT 128. So, for instance, if you're a transit department within a city or county or a larger umbrella organization, maybe some of those costs benefit you. You might have a federally approved indirect cost rate, or there might be a central service cost allocation plan, so that in your public transit program, you can reflect what those costs actually are coming from another part of the organization. So keeping in mind that you're trying to report all of your costs, we also have to talk about how your costs need to be reported, particularly in PTN 128, by mode and by area. And in order to do that, you will need some sort of cost allocation process or tool or plan. So when we talk about service-based operational cost allocation, we're talking about taking your operational costs, right? So that's everything other than capital, and allocating those costs to your modes and to urban and rural using service-related data, transit service-related data, for example, vehicle miles and vehicle hours. Because in some cases, it's too easy to separate all costs by like, oh, these are my motor bus costs, and these are my demand response costs, and these are my commuter bus costs. There's likely some costs that benefit multiple modes that are going to need to be allocated to each mode using a service-based approach. And some examples here are like administrative salaries or utility costs, in terms of assigning them to a mode. And then you also have a mode that might cover multiple areas, like a rural area and an urban area. And so it might require you to do cost allocation to accurately report urban versus rural costs. Now, you could do a whole 4-hour workshop just on cost allocation, but what I'll walk you through is just the idea that of developing a cost allocation model. Your agency, if you have multiple modes and serve rural or urban areas, if either one of those two things apply to you, you should have some sort of cost allocation process in place, what we call a cost allocation model, which is these are the steps we're going to follow to allocate costs. So if you're going to create one, if you don't already have one in place, or maybe you want to update yours, or maybe you're using some worksheet that was developed 5 years ago by somebody and we don't really know why, we assign X% to motor bus and X% to demand response, right? It might be time to update your cost allocation model. First thing is like what costs are to be allocated. In this case, we're focusing on operational costs. If there's any applicable guidance like FTA circulars or TxDOT requirements, et cetera, be aware of those. Determine the services or service groups where you're trying to allocate costs to. In the case of PTN 28, right, it'll be urban versus rural and by mode, right? So you need to report costs by those buckets. And then you actually then develop, collect the data you need to allocate costs. I'll get into what some options are there. Classify your costs so you know which costs are shared and need to be allocated versus which costs can be directly assigned to a mode or to an area. And then assign your direct costs to your particular services, allocate any shared costs to your services, and then use your results to report to PTN 28 or for other purposes. And it's important to document that model and update it at least annually so that you know that you are accurately allocating costs to your modes and to your urban or rural areas. There are many different industry methodologies. We have several links here. I'm going to ask Kelly or Christina to put some of them in the chat so you can click them directly. There is a manual by National RTAP that's available. There is a cost allocation calculator that National RTAP also has. And there's also webinars and things, particularly on cost allocation. Now, none of those directly tie to how PTN 128 costs have to be reported, but the concepts of allocating costs to mode and by urban and rural do apply. In practice, for those agencies that are trying to report their costs to PTN 128, if you already have a plan in place or a model in place, continue to use it. Those that are looking to improve or implement a cost allocation process, you have a couple of options for doing operational cost allocation for PTN 128 reporting. So for instance, you can maybe just do an annual evaluation, run your cost allocation model at the end of each year and figure out what % of your costs are attributable to each mode and or each area, and do that at the end of the fiscal year. And then going into the future year, use those same percentages, assuming your service and your cost structure doesn't change. to enter your monthly data throughout the new fiscal year, right? And then you update that percentage every fiscal year. That's one way to handle cost allocation and still comply with our reporting policy in PT 128. You could do that process quarterly, where you run the cost allocation results every quarter and then go back and report your monthly data using the results of your quarterly cost allocation. Or you could do it monthly, literally run the cost allocation model every single month, and allocate a month's expenses using your cost allocation model. Those are some options that are at place for cost allocation. Now, one of the other topics we'll talk about is revenue allocation. And again, this is something that's very unique to PTN 128 reporting and only applies to reporters in PTN 128 that are reporting multiple modes and or are reporting service in both urban and rural areas. Christina talked earlier about how you have to allocate costs to each mode and area worksheet, and each worksheet, right? For instance, your motor bus worksheet has to have by the end of the year balanced expenses and revenues. So if you're allocating expenses to your motor bus worksheet, then how much revenues do you assign to motor bus? Or we allow for the idea that you might need to allocate revenues also to your modes, rather, because typically revenue isn't mode specific revenue, with the exception of passenger fares, right? Only really passenger fares is usually mode specific revenue. Most other revenue sources just cover your different modes in your public transportation program. So you might need, for PT 128 reporting, to have what we would call a revenue allocation model. And basically speaking, it's just a way to allocate your revenues to your individual PT 128 worksheets, so that in the end, your revenues balance with the expenses you allocated to each worksheet. There's different ways you could do this. One potential approach, right, is you start with allocating your costs to each worksheet using whatever cost allocation model you might have. Then make sure that you assign the fare revenues to each worksheet, because those do have to be reported by mode. If there are any direct revenues, so revenues that, for instance, maybe you have a grant that only applies to your demand response service, then it would make sense to report that revenue as only covering demand response expenses, right? Then kind of see what's left. How much expenses do you have left for every mode? And then allocate the rest of your revenue that was applied to expenses to individual worksheets based on how much expenses are left to be covered. One little happy face here is that this idea of revenue allocation by mode and by urban rural is not required in the new system. The new PT 128 system that's effective FY27 going forward will not require you to do this. So yay! But for FY26, this still is an issue. So there is a tool downloadable on the PT 128 website if you do not already have a cost allocation and revenue allocation tool. There is one available. It's available there. It's an Excel workbook. It supports up to 5 modes, and it just uses vehicle miles to allocate both expenses and revenues. Don't use the tool to allocate capital expenses and capital revenues, because capital expenses and capital revenues should be reported specifically one mode. These are vehicles for motor bus. These are vehicles or a facility that mostly benefits demand response. And that's following NTD reporting requirements. So we wanted to walk through that because I know it can be complicated for those agencies with multiple mode worksheets and or urban rural areas, just remembering that you may have to allocate costs and you may have to allocate revenues in order to get your worksheets to balance PT 128. Any questions on cost and or revenue allocation? All right. Well, then moving on to module 9, 10, 11, and 12. So these modules are now walking you through less about reporting concepts, but are getting into module 9 is how to use the system, and then 10 and 11 are about the quarterly annual review process. So Module 9 walks us through these topics. We'll just very quickly talk about how to navigate the system, how to enter data, how to select travel modes and programs, the fact that you can download worksheets. We'll talk a little bit about user roles and who can see what data, and also give examples of some helpful reports and outputs available in the current system. When you log into the PTN 128 system, you will come to this sort of landing page. That's what we call it. It's PTN 128 landing page. You will see on the left-hand side of the screen all the fiscal years. When you hover over a fiscal year, you will see options. One thing you'll see is the year is a link. It's a link to your monthly reporting worksheet or worksheets. So if you're in fiscal year 25, then you would click on that link, and it's going to take you to your monthly reporting worksheets for fiscal year 25. You also notice that you can, each fiscal year is either open or closed. Open means that's the active fiscal year for you to enter data. Right now, we're in fiscal year 26. That is the only open fiscal year at this moment. Fiscal years also offer reports, so you can go into a specific fiscal year and look at some reports that are available. There are other options and other features on the website. There's the little home button to return to this home page or the landing page here. You can go to your account and change some settings or log out. There's references and tools and tutorials. We talked today about how the recording from today and the slides from today and the updated reporting manual are all available on the PTN 128 website. What we mean is you log in and then you will see them there as links, right? Documents or training and resources. Remember that the recording and slides from today will be posted. The slides will be posted before the end of the day. The recording might take us a day to edit out any of the dead space, but that'll also be posted. When you click on a fiscal year and you go to your worksheets, you will have a worksheet for every mode and or every combination of mode and program. Okay, and so let's just focus on the idea of a single mode worksheet. The single mode worksheet is divided into three main sections. You have your service data, which we talked about, your vehicle hours and miles, and unlinked passenger trips. Then underneath that, you will find your financial data, which will ask you for your applied revenues. It'll ask you for your operational expenses. It'll ask you for your capital expenses. And the worksheet provides a reasonableness check, that balance between revenues and expenses. Underneath that section, you will find the fleet data section, which is where you would report your fleet statistics, like your revenue vehicles fleet and your vehicles operated at maximum service or VOMs, and the section for reporting mechanical system failures. Now, when you're in a single worksheet, this is just a snapshot of the top part of the worksheet. Pay attention to which mode worksheet you are in. The travel mode dropdown will appear at the top. You can change your travel modes. Maybe you want to go to demand response and fill out that worksheet. You will click on the travel mode dropdown and change the mode. That'll refresh the entire worksheet, and then you'll be seeing your demand response data. A note about data entry: when there's the blank cells where you do enter data, data entered saves automatically. So once you change a value and move to the next cell, the data will be saved. It doesn't require you to hit the save button. However, blank values will not save. So the most common problems we have is that somebody said, oh, I deleted the value and then I moved on and I logged out. Maybe they weren't supposed to have revenue hours or something, right? Or a revenue source, and they delete the value and then log out or move on. The system will not save the deletion. You have to have a value in the cell for the data to save. So if there shouldn't be anything there, you input a 0, not just delete, right? So always remember there has to be a value to be saved in the system. At the end of each row, you will see a little bubble. It's actually visible in this screenshot here. The far right-hand side of each row, there is a little bubble for that line. Those are comments. We highly recommend you to enter comments on any line items where you want to remember an explanation or you have a special note for us. They're very, very helpful to feel like, oh yeah, February we had this happen. There was a major snowstorm or something like that, right? So it's a good place to provide explanations. The website also gives you little blue icons next to every term on the website, and if you hover over the blue eye icon, it will provide a definition for that line item. For those rural transit districts that also serve urban areas but are not urban transit districts, right? We talked about the idea of how they have programs. This is like Fort Bend County, El Paso Transportation Authority, and a few others that are only rural transit districts in the eyes of the state, but also receive urban funding, right? For those districts, not only do you have a mode dropdown for your worksheets, you also have the program type dropdown. We talked a little bit about this in Module 2. So just make sure that when you're entering data, you're on the appropriate program type and appropriate mode so that you're not running into a case where you have to go back and edit data or revise what you input. Every worksheet can be downloaded, and you can download the worksheets as Excels or PDFs, save them to wherever you want. There's a little Excel and PDF icon at the top of a worksheet to enable you to do that. We often get asked, well, what can users see and who can see my data? So transit agency users can only see the worksheets that they're assigned to, right? You're assigned transit district. So if you only have one district, you're only going to be able to see one agency's data. Maybe if you're reporting data for multiple districts, like an urban district and a rural district, you're going to have the links for both of them. Now, TTI, PTN, and PTCs can see the monthly data entered by all agencies. PTCs can see the data that they're. Wait, Christine, is that true? PTCs can only see the agencies they're assigned to. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But yeah, so that's who can see the data. But again, TTI can see everything. PTN staff, administrative staff can download anything, see everything that's entered. But transit agency users really can only see and edit their own data for their transit agency. Now, there's a lot of different reports available on PTN 128, and I'm not going to go into every single one, but if you want to see the reports, you have to hover over the fiscal year and click on the reports icon, which will give you reports for that specific fiscal year. The reporting menu has many different reports in it. I'm going to highlight one particular report that I really like and I think is interesting, called the status report. It's available after you click on a given fiscal year and you click on reports. On the left-hand side, you first have to click on agency reports. Then step 2, you would select your agency from the dropdown. And then step 3, you click the status report link. When you do that, you'll be able to see all of the data entered for all line items for as many fiscal years as data are in the system, which can be very, very useful for longitudinal data analysis and reporting, or even checking your latest fiscal year's data against past data for reasonableness. There's also charts that are available in that report that show you several charts for key performance measures. The system has also several other useful outputs if you want to look at a specific mode or all modes combined. If you want to look at your cost per hour or cost per mile, those are available on lines 141 and 142. If you want to look at your passengers per mile, passengers per hour, those are available on lines 48 and 49. And your cost per passenger is line 140. There, at the very bottom of every worksheet, there are several lines that calculate metrics that are actually used in the Texas Transit Funding Formula. We don't use the direct calculation in PTN 128, neither does TxDOT. TxDOT exports data from PTN 128 and then calculates these values on their own. But those 4 measures at their bottom, these are things that are factor into state funding allocations. Any questions about logging in and just navigating the PTN 128 website before we move on to the quarterly check process? Okay, Christina, I'm going to stop sharing and let you take back over.
All right. All righty. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right, so give me just a second here. Okay. So now we're going to, great timing on this as well, the quarterly check reports. So as agencies enter their data throughout the year, as noted previously, data is required to be reported on a quarterly reporting cycle. And following the due date of your reporting quarter, the following month, we will go through and do a quarterly check. Now, I do want to preface this by saying MTAs, a lot of this information that I'm going to be sharing, this doesn't apply to you. We don't historically, TTI has not gone into the same level of review for MTA agency information as we do for other agencies. So if some of this, as we're going through this, if you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound familiar, that would be why. So on the quarterly check process, it's basically we're looking at, we run reports to provide to agencies that kind of give you a high level overview of, kind of where your data stands. And it highlights any of your, anything that may look out of whack, anything that is, unusual, in any missing data, etc. So this is just a process that we go through. We run these reports, we email them to the agencies. So this is just kind of an informal thing. We email it over to you, and we include, if you're an agency that is has a PTC assigned, we'll include your text.ptc. And we do this for each of the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year. We don't do this for the final quarter because at that point we're doing the annual review, which we will talk about in just a moment. So why do we do this? This is really just designed to make sure that agencies are keeping up with their data throughout the year. It's going to help save time and reduce issues when it comes time to doing the annual report, and it helps to improve data quality because agencies are able to address any kind of anomalies in their data more readily if it's done promptly. So as far as responsibilities go, when we send this information over to you, this is information for us to send to you to say, hey, this is what your data is looking like. These are the things that we have noted. And agencies can go through and review this information to determine, if there are mistakes that need to be corrected, or if there is, maybe there is just simply a very legitimate reason for whatever was noted that month or that quarter. So the only time that you have to respond to TTI is if we actually ask you. So if there's something that's, very, very out of the normal, or if you really did have some, some unusual circumstances going on, then we'll ask you to provide a response. But normally this is just something for us to send over to you that will allow you to kind of go through your data and make sure that everything is looking the way that it should. So when we send this data over to you, the reports that we have, there's going to be very different variance checks. It's going to be looking at your hours, your miles, your speed, your passenger trips, any kind of, just various data elements that are, really highlighted in the PTN 128 system. It's going to be looking for any missing data and any new data as well. So like if you're reporting something that you haven't reported in the past, then we'll, bring that to your attention. So when you receive the report, there's going to be, it's usually nice and colorful. There are different highlights to draw your attention to different circumstances. For example, if it's yellow, if it's highlighted in yellow, it just means that this month's value is 10% higher or lower than the average for the present quarter. So each one of these colors has a kind of a different significance. So again, just to bring your attention to it, so it gives you an opportunity to look at that information and determine if something was maybe not entered in correctly, or maybe just to identify that yes, this is this does look odd, it looks off because of X, Y, or Z reason. So again, just because something has been flagged as outside of the normal parameters, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that it's, we want you to take a look and make sure that it is actually valid. So again, just in general, this is intended to kind of help save time and reduce the burden at the end of the year when you're trying to go through and address all your entire year's worth of data. And we send this out on the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year, not on the last. Again, just highlights any kind of problems, and it allows you to correct potential problems early on. So moving on to the annual review process. So this one is definitely much more thorough than the quarterly reports. Again, this is this process that I'm describing is not something that we go into depth with MTAs. So once again, if you're an MTA agency and this doesn't sound familiar, that would be why. So on the annual review process, this is kind of for those agencies that report to NTD. This is kind of similar to that NTD validation process that you go through. It is our way of going through and validating your data. So we will go through an in-depth review of the data that you have reported in PTN 128. We'll be looking at your information as a whole, for your agency, as well as by each mode. And so during this process, we will coordinate with agencies. We'll be sending a review document back and forth with questions, etc. This is normally happening during the, usually starts off in September and ends around in December. So during that time frame, there's a lot of back and forth between TTI and the agencies, reviewing and verifying data. And the whole reason we do this is because, again, this is information that is used for one thing. It's used for the formula allocations for those agencies that receive funding from TxDOT. So we want to make sure that we are verifying the integrity of the data that's provided to TxDOT for that purpose. And it's also for those agencies that TxDOT has to report to NTD. Any of these questions that come up that we're asking you, chances are the NTD analyst is going to be asking TxDOT the same thing when they submit that report over. So we're trying to get that information ahead of time so that we're prepared for that. So what kind of things do we look at during the annual review? We're looking for either missing or inconsistent data. We're looking at year-over-year changes. Not all changes of a plus or minus 5%. Some of those thresholds are different in different circumstances depending on what it is. We're looking at the relationships between data points. If your hours increased significantly, but your miles decreased significantly, we're going to be looking at things like that. We'll be looking at your data by mode and in whole. Your urban rural splits, we'll be looking at that, and it covers your financial data, your service data, your fleet and your safety data, all of those data points we're going to be looking at. Once again, as mentioned during the quarterly reports, just because we ask a question doesn't necessarily mean that it is wrong. It just means that it is different, and we're trying to understand why. So as mentioned, we look at the correlation of changes in hours and miles, changes in passenger trips compared to your hours and miles, changes in operating expenses compared to hours, and any new or discontinued funding sources. So those are just some examples of the types of things that we're looking for during this review process. So the performance measures that are automatically calculated in PTN 128 can be very useful for this process. So for agencies to go through and look, that data is there in the system and available for you to review. So you can compare your month-to-month data, your current year to previous year data, and those metrics that Michael mentioned earlier, like your deadhead ratios and your system speeds and your reasonableness checks. All of those things are there so that you can review your agency's data ahead of time to look and see if there's anything that might look like it is, that it may not be correct. So as noted here, if there's anything that seems unusual, you probably want to look into it and just make sure that everything is okay. And you can do that all throughout the year, just FYI. There are some supplemental data. There's some supplemental data that we do gather outside of PTN 128 currently. And so this is not, doesn't apply to all agencies, but primarily for those TxDOT subrecipients, we will send out additional requests for NTD reporting forms, some additional information that's required. So right now, we don't have a way in PTN 128 to get that information, to collect that information. So it's usually us sending out a a supplemental document or something for you to send over to us. And then for those agencies that TxDOT does report to NTD, even though we've gone through the entire annual review process and we on our side, we've gotten all of our questions answered, that data may be submitted over to NTD and NTD may have their other questions that come up. And so, it's not uncommon for us to say, yay, you have already, your annual review is complete. And then, a month or two later, we're coming back with additional questions, and that is part of that NTD review process. So those questions that they come up with, if that hasn't already been addressed in your annual review, we'll be coming back to you with additional questions. All right, so are there any questions on either the quarterly checks or the annual review process?
Christina, I got nothing in the chat right now.
Okay. Well, then I'm gonna go ahead and move on to my favorite subject of the day. So, as we have alluded to several times throughout this presentation today, the PTN 128 reporting system is changing. So the new redesigned system is called the Texas Transit Tracker, which we have been calling T3 for short. So we have training that's coming up in August. But for right now, I wanted to go through a highlight of some of the things to expect with the new reporting system. So as mentioned, the Texas Transit Tracker, or T3, is the new and improved version of PTN 128. It is effective for fiscal year 2027 reporting. When we went into this process, we had several goals in mind. First and foremost, making sure that we're aligning with state and NTD reporting requirements. There have been a lot of changes over the years, and we had to do a lot of external data collection and a lot of data manipulation in order to meet the reporting requirements. And so we just wanted to make sure that we were able to align with those reporting requirements as much as possible just out of the system. We also, obviously a priority is making sure that the data that is collected is attributed to the appropriate geographies for formula funding purposes. And we wanted to reduce as much external data collection as possible. So those things that I mentioned earlier that, we have to do kind of supplemental requests, want to reduce that as much as possible. And obviously, we want to keep you guys in mind and reduce complexity and improve the user experience as much as possible. So some of the general changes, the fundamental, a very fundamental change is reporting by transit provider as opposed to by transit district. Now, this is more so in the cases that Michael mentioned earlier, where you have rural transit districts that provide service in an urbanized area, or those agencies that serve as both a rural transit district and an urban transit district, like the BTDs of the world. This is a major change for you guys. So in the new system, you will no longer have to provide separate reports for those areas that are served. So in the example of BTD mentioned earlier, currently BTD serves as a rural transit district and an urban transit district, and they report two completely separate reports of all data elements. And in the new system, there will be one report for BTD. And there will be an opportunity at the end of the year to allocate data between those geographies served, very similar to what the NTD, how NTD reports that now. Same thing for those rural transit districts that have the different program types. That will go away as well, using that same process of allocating data between the geographies served at the end of the year. So that's going to be a major change for those reporting agencies. And I think that is going to be a very welcome change. It's going to make your reporting life much easier. Aside from that, we have, the rest of these are going to be impacting most everybody. So the data field changes, so that we have eliminated some of the old fields that are no longer relevant. We've consolidated some. One of those I mentioned earlier about the different revenue, local revenue line items that were kind of consolidated. We had 4 of them that were consolidated into just one. And then we added some new fields. And for the most part, that is a welcomed feature. That is addressing things such as what we talked about earlier, that the federal funds, we don't have a category for certain types of funding if it didn't meet in any of those predefined boxes that we had for you previously. Agencies didn't know where to report. So now we have more fields so that you are easily able to identify where you need to report those funding streams. The mode and type of service. So currently in PTN 128, we report data by travel mode alone. So that means like if you're operating demand response or commuter bus or motor bus, that's basically just the extent of that categorization. However, in the new system, it's going to be mode and type of service. So it's going to have that additional qualifier at the end. And that just says, are you reporting for directly operated services, or are you reporting for purchase transportation services? So if in the event that you provide demand response, both directly operated demand response, and you also provide demand response using a purchase transportation provider, those will have to be reported separately. On the revenue reporting, as Michael has already kind of alluded to, revenue reporting, that whole allocation exercise that we talked about earlier will go away. So the only revenues that are going to be reported by mode are going to be your passenger fares, your organization paid fares, and then your Medicaid NEMT, your Medicaid Medical Transportation Program, and Area Agency on Aging. Those are the only revenues that will be reported by mode. All other revenues are going to be just reported cumulatively. Safety and security reporting, that is a new thing in PTN 128. I'll talk a little more about that in just a minute. And then the geographic allocation form, that is basically the mechanism that we referred to earlier about for agencies that provide service in multiple geographies, a rural transit district providing service in an urban area. This is where you would enter that information to designate your data for each of those respective areas. All right, so this is a screenshot of the new login page. So the new system is going to have a completely different URL, so completely different system here. However, there are a lot of things about the system that does have the same look and feel. So there's some level of familiarity there. A big change is that in the new system, when you log in, you will use your email address. So your email address will be taking the place of your username. So this is going to be very important for any agencies that maybe you've got multiple people who are sharing the same login or something like that in the past. There is also going to be a multi-factor authentication, which means when you enter your email and your password, it's going to email you a security code. So keep that in mind if you are an agency that has historically utilized a uniform login or something in the past. We're needing to move to that direction of having each person individually set up as a user in the system. We're also going to be doing some level of communication from the system itself, so we want to make sure that everybody's information is in there. Another cool feature in the new system is that if you forgot your password, then you'll be able to go through and reset your password on your own without having to go through us and reach out to us. Not that we mind, but it does make it a lot easier to just be able to do that on your own. And before I forget, when you your password, so your email address will be, again, your username. The passwords that are moved over will be inherited from the current system. But again, if you, for whatever reason, if it's not working, you can still reset your password. So this is the new landing page. So again, you know, this is still somewhat familiar to what you're saying now. We have the resources section over here on the right-hand pane, which is going to have like information, your documents, training videos and resources, your dashboard. So same thing like when in the current system, this is going to take you back to the home page from whatever screen that you're in. You'll have some agency information, so just high-level information on your agency, and a support center. So this is basically if you need anything, you can just click in here and enter your request or your request for support, and it'll send an email to us. Similar to the current system, if you are trying to access your reports, you're just going to go to the current or whichever fiscal year that you need to look at. You'll notice down here where it says load more, data from all years will be moved over into the new system. So this is going to be, you know, all of the data that you had previously is going to be brought over. The new format of the system, so like the new worksheets and everything else, that will be applicable for fiscal year 26 and 25. So for these 2 years here, 2024 and prior will be according to the, you know, how they were set up in PTN 128 as of today. So this is a screenshot of what the service data and expenses worksheet is going to look like. So when you go in and you click on, like say for 2026, this is going to be kind of like your landing page. It'll automatically default to the service data and expenses tab. So you can see here, very similar concept. Whatever your travel mode is, there is a, you know, oops, I clicked on it. Go figure. It's been a long morning, guys. Okay, so you'll just click on this and it will, you know, allow you to toggle between your travel modes. Same thing as before, you've got your cumulative travel mode sheet and your prior year worksheets. Let's see, we do have more information here to provide on your service days, so that we have that information. That'll help really alleviate some of the questions that we have when, you know, like maybe one month had more service days than the other or less. So it'll help with those types of questions. As mentioned, the applied revenues. So the applied revenues now will no longer be on your service, reported by mode. So now, instead of having all of the different, you know, reporting revenues by demand response and travel, you know, motor bus or any other travel mode that you have, it's going to be reported cumulatively. So the fare information, those items that I mentioned, that will still be reported by mode on your service data and expenses worksheets will carry over. So this will be an accumulation of what was reported on those individual travel modes, and it'll pull right in here. And then all of your revenue reporting categories will be listed below. There are a couple of things, a couple of other differences with reporting revenues. So even though that you no longer have to report your revenues separately by mode, you are going to have to report separately for between operating and capital. This does not apply to your to the MTAs. But all other agencies, your revenues applied towards capital and operating will be reported separately. And there is a new reporting line for capital assistance spent on operations. So that'll be a new reporting line. We'll go into more depth in that in the actual training that we will have next month.
Yeah, there was a question in the chat, but Michael seems to be following up on it. The question was, will rail also be included in the cumulative?
Yes. Just to make sure that I'm...
Wait, I asked a follow-up question, which was,
Okay.
yes, for the service data and expenses worksheets, when you click cumulative, will that include rail, I believe is the question. Thanks, Jessica. And then yes, as long as you have a service data and expenses worksheet for your rail mode, entered, then the cumulative will collapse all mode worksheets into a single report, so you can see that, whatever the modes are.
Yep.
And Christine, I'm just doing a time check here. We are at 12:06, so
Okay.
And we do want to have time for the evaluation and stuff before 12:15.
Okay.
So.
Alrighty. All right. So there is a new reporting worksheet for safety and security. Again, this is not intended to be, in-depth training for this purpose. That'll be more in later in August. So we've got, we'll be collecting additional information. This does not replace the PTN 101. So unfortunately, that's not going to take care of any of that. There are several different sections. So it's going to be collecting information on physical assaults on transit workers, non-physical assaults on transit workers, and then other safety and security events, which is basically, incidents and accidents. And this is mainly reporting counts, like the number of events that are happening and the number of injuries or fatalities resulting from that. And there is area for reporting additional information. This is the annual geographic allocation form, which is what I mentioned earlier, allows agencies to report the relevant data between geographies. So if it's urban versus rural, this is kind of what it will look like here. So as mentioned, coming up in August, later in August, we will be doing system training. We will be posting a basic navigation video that's going to show you how to, just general navigation of the system that you can review ahead of time. We'll have another policy manual, so an updated policy manual for the new system. And on the system training, so we'll be sending out, like early next week, we'll be sending out registration notifications to go ahead and get signed up for that. There are some sessions that will allow kind of like hands-on opportunity. So you'll, for a brief time, for about a week span, you'll have access to the system that you can kind of go in and, like a sandbox environment, kind of click around, learn your way around in the system before the system actually goes live. If for some reason you're not able to attend one of the trainings that we have made available, then that information, the recordings will be made available afterwards, so you can still go back. Or even if you do attend and you want to rewatch it and refamiliarize yourself with the information, you can always go back and watch the recordings. So as mentioned, the new system is targeted to launch for September 1 for fiscal year 2027 reporting. So all of fiscal year 2026 will continue to be reported in the current PTN 128 system. The 2026 data in the Texas Transit Tracker, T3, will not be live. So when you go in for doing your entering in your fiscal year 2027 data, even though you're going to see fiscal year 26 there, you don't need to be entering any information on there. And if you notice that it's not up to date with what you've entered in the current system, don't panic. That is intended. All information from the current PTN 128 system, once the year is wrapped up, will be moved over into the new system. And as mentioned, the legacy data will be imported and available in the new system as well. So you're not going to lose any of that historical information. Okay. All right.
Great. Does anybody have any questions for Christina on T3, the launch of T3, Anything like that?
You're very welcome, Kayla.
Okay. Well, I will, if there's any other questions, of course, feel free to raise them. We'll get into the wrapping up this workshop. We appreciate y'all sharing your extra 15 minutes with us. And just as a reminder, today we covered lots of material, all the way from the why to report and who needs to report to hours and miles and passenger trips and vehicles and mechanical failures, revenues and expenses. And that's a lot. It's a lot of information. The PT128 reporting manual, the newly updated version, is available on the PT128 website when you log in there. If you need more guidance on some of the definitions that NTD follows, always feel free to check out the National Transit Database Reduced Reporter Manual if you're a rural agency, or the full reporting manual. But generally speaking, the way PTN28 is designed, it more closely follows the reduced reporting requirements. So that's usually the best thing to go to. There's obviously the NTD glossary. If you need help with cost allocation, there's National RTAP has its tool and various other webinars, like I mentioned. And again, there's several recordings. Even the recording from today will be posted to the PTN128 website. Now, I realize that having a lot of places to go get help is nice, but the best thing and the most helpful thing is sometimes just talking to somebody. So we are here to try to help. We know that every agency's circumstances are sometimes unique. And as much as you want to try to follow reporting policy or guidance, maybe you're not sure how it applies to you. Maybe you're not sure exactly how to define this term in your context. Feel free to reach out, right? Christina's a very scary person. When you start talking to her, it's obvious, I'm sure. No, she's here to help. So her phone number and email address is there. She's the best person to go to. Or you can email the general PTN128 help email address. Several of us on the team have access to that email. It's just ptn128help@tti.tamu.edu. And again, you can email Christina at c-bune, B-U-N-E, @tti.tamu.edu. I will pause here. I would really appreciate you filling out the workshop evaluation survey. It shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 minutes. There is a link that's shown there. I also put the link in the chat, or you can scan the QR code with your phone. It'll take you to a survey instrument. It'll ask you which workshop are you reviewing. Just select the PTN 128 reporting as the workshop. And on the second screen, it'll ask you which session, and just pick the one that has today's date on it. Then after that, you can fill out the rest of the evaluation tool. Again, we want your honest feedback so that we can know for future training sessions, and also for the T3 training, if you have any constructive criticism, feedback for this workshop. I'm going to leave this up on the screen. Hope that you all will take the time to fill that out. While you're doing that, I will pause to see if anyone else has any other questions that they wanted to ask but weren't sure if there'd be time. Now we're here, and the mic is open. Okay. Well then, I thank you all for your time and for being here today. Remember, if you want to come back tomorrow, 1 p.m., just feel free to register for that. If you need any information about tomorrow's workshop or want to share it with others at your agency, let us know if we can help in any way. Y'all have a great day, and thank you very much for your time and attention. We look forward to reading your reviews. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye.